look at you like that, you lose it completely. Losing track of space and time. I don't wanna go home looking for a reason to stay here all night. I wonder, do you feel it too? Magic between me and you, the way that you make me feel. You wonder if I feel the same, the blood's rushing through your veins. And then when I say your name, bet I'm everything you see. Bet I'm everything you need. We're high on this feeling, don't wanna come down. Just go on and tell me, get into my eyes. I'm everything you need. I'm everything you need. You usually don't share any secrets. Suddenly you're an open book. When I struggle to find the words, you get me completely. It's like I've known you forever, so I wonder, do you feel it too? Magic between me and you, the way that you make me feel. You wonder if I feel the same, the blood's rushing through your veins. And then when I say your name, bet I'm everything you see. Bet I'm everything you need. We're high on this feeling, don't wanna come down. Just go on and tell me, get into my eyes. I'm everything you need. 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 Bet I'm everything you see. Bet I'm everything you need. We're high on this feeling, don't wanna come down. Just go on and tell me, get into my eyes. I'm everything you see. Bet I'm everything you need. We're high on this feeling, don't wanna come down. Just go on and tell me, get into my eyes. I'm everything you need. I'm everything you need. I'm everything you need. but I'm losing my grip. I need someone who can make me feel better. Wrap me up in a sweater, treat my pain with a kiss. Then suddenly you are here, inside my head, everywhere. Where did you come from? I'm wondering, baby, are you made up of for real? Say, can you feel what I feel? 'Cause I can tell if I'm just dreaming. I wish I had a girl like you, and wish you could be real, but you're not really here. And I don't wanna wake up without you, but tonight is gonna have to do if I'm gonna get with a girl like you. I fade away, every day you're not with me. Maybe now that you've showed me what love could be like, what can I say? I know it sounds like I'm crazy, but I need to believe in you to get through my life. Then suddenly you are here, inside my head, everywhere. Where did you come from? first love, we were young and wild, we were up all night. You don't forget that summer sun, 2009. We were feeling high, and I got drunk for the first time. I thought I was cool. I thought I looked smooth in your eyes and tried to make a move. It was summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. It was summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. Don't forget your first kiss. We were so damn high, we could touch the sky. Drunk on love, drunk on your lips, the feeling I will forever miss. And I got drunk for the first time. I thought I was cool. I thought I looked smooth in your eyes and tried to make a move. It was summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. It was summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were my ride or die. 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 Summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. It was summertime, the time of our lives. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were on my mind, my ride or die. Yeah. You were my ride or die. 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 Don't forget your first love. We were young and wild. We were up all night. it's a big mistake. I just hope that we're still okay. You always pick me up and let me down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want. And I always pick you up and let you down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want, to what we want. There's a party downtown, we are drunk and the music's loud. I forget that we're done, that you're back with your girlfriend now. For a minute, I'm back where we started, in that hallway. We couldn't keep our hands away from each other. Did you ever tell her I have to sleep in the bed I made? I don't sleep much at all these days, 'cause you always pick me up and let me down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want. And I always pick you up and let you down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want, to what we want, to what we want, to what we want. There's a party downtown, really hope that you're coming by. You always pick me up and let me down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want. And I always pick you up and let you down. We're spinning around, losing our minds. And if we do, then if we don't, then if we give in what we want, to what we want. I'm a mess. Don't know how I got here, but I'm blessed. Didn't know it'd take me past my destiny. You're behind me with the rest, 'cause I'm a mess. No more you.
And I go home. You said things could only get better. I needed more than ever. They don't. How can I believe you when everything is secret, secret? Everything is secret, secret. Everything is secret, secret. Everything is secret. How can I believe it when everything is secret, secret? You see through, gotta make space for the new you, like I'm old news in your rearview mirror. It must be nice you went and got a penthouse, all your friends partying it's real loud. Brand new money with a brand new chest, still a baby bird price straight off the nest like you. No more, yeah. can I believe it when everything is seeming go home? You said things could only get better. I need it more than ever. They don't. Home. You said things could only get better. I need it more than ever. They don't. How can I believe you when everything is see-through?
How can I believe
Everything is see-through. Everything is see-through. Everything is see-through. How can I believe it when everything is see-through?
You ain't gotta be so see-through. You ain't gotta be see-through, yeah. You ain't gotta be so see-through. You ain't gotta be see-through.
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life. Deep connection lights a spark. It's like you know me in the depths of my heart. We're dreamers. Don't care what other people say. We're living like this could be our final day. We're dreamers. Don't care what the others say. We're doing this in our way. We come alive in the nighttime. It's something about how we dance in the moonlight. That look in your eyes, it tells me that you want me and all my loving. We come alive in the nighttime. You and I, we come alive. We come alive. We come alive. What's your weakness? What's your type? Somehow I want